My name is Dr. Sarah Elizabeth Montgomery, and I'm 61 years old. For 37 years, I've been a practicing physician, spending most of my career in internal medicine treating patients over 50. I've seen thousands of people through their final moments, held countless hands as souls departed this world, and witnessed both peaceful passings and desperate struggles against death. I'm not what most would call a deeply religious person, though I've always believed in something greater than ourselves. Growing up Methodist in small-town Ohio, I attended church regularly as a child, but medical school and decades of seeing suffering made me question many things. I believed in God, but I kept him at arm's length, focusing on science and medicine rather than faith and spirituality. I live alone in a modest home outside Columbus, Ohio. My husband David died 8 years ago from pancreatic cancer, one of those cruel ironies where a doctor couldn't save the person she loved most. Our 2 children live on opposite coasts, busy with their own careers and families. Most evenings, you'd find me reviewing patient files, reading medical journals, or watching the news while worrying about the state of healthcare in America. Working in geriatric medicine, I'd grown increasingly disturbed by what I was seeing in nursing homes and hospitals. Not just the usual challenges of aging and illness, but something darker. Patients who had been faithful Christians their entire lives, suddenly filled with doubt and despair in their final days. People who had prayed regularly for decades, refusing to see chaplains, cursing God, dying in spiritual agony that seemed far worse than their physical pain. I'd attributed it to normal psychological responses to terminal illness, fear, anger, the natural human resistance to mortality. But the pattern was becoming too consistent, too widespread. It was as if something was systematically attacking the faith of dying believers, especially those over 50, right when they needed it most. On Sunday evening, September 1st, 2025, just 1 week ago, I was at home reviewing charts when I felt the first chest pain. As a doctor, I knew immediately what was happening. The crushing pressure in my chest, the pain radiating down my left arm, the sudden shortness of breath, classic signs of a massive heart attack. I managed to call 911 before collapsing on my kitchen floor, but I knew it was too late. The pain was overwhelming, and I could feel my heart struggling, then beginning to fail completely. My vision grew dark, and I felt that familiar sensation I'd witnessed so many times in my patients, the moment when the body gives up its hold on life. But instead of darkness, I found myself floating above my own body, watching paramedics work frantically to revive me. I could see them shocking my heart, injecting medications, performing CPR with desperate intensity. But I felt no pain, no fear, just an incredible sense of freedom and lightness. There was this warm, golden light drawing me upward, away from the chaos below. I wasn't scared at all. For the first time since David died, I felt completely at peace. The light grew brighter and more beautiful, and then I saw him. Jesus was standing before me, and every picture, every artistic representation I'd ever seen was completely inadequate. He was tall and strong, with kind eyes that seemed to hold all the compassion in the universe. When he looked at me, I felt like he knew every patient I'd ever treated, every life I'd tried to save, every moment I'd struggled with doubt about his existence. "Sarah," he said, and his voice went through me like liquid warmth, "my faithful healer." I started to protest. I hadn't been particularly faithful, had questioned his existence more than I'd affirmed it. But he held up his hand gently. "You've spent your life caring for my people in their most vulnerable moments," he continued. "Every time you comforted a frightened patient, every time you fought for someone's life, every time you showed compassion to the suffering, that was serving me, even when you didn't realize it." Tears began flowing down my face. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming relief and joy. Like a weight I'd carried for years was suddenly lifted. He reached out and touched my forehead, and waves of love poured through me. Love deeper than anything I'd felt, even in my happiest moments with David. It was like being embraced by perfect understanding and acceptance. "But I need to show you something urgent," Jesus said, his expression becoming more serious. "There are 3 events coming very soon that will test the faith of my people like nothing in modern history. You need to see what's really happening in the spiritual realm so you can prepare them." Suddenly, we weren't in that beautiful light anymore. We were standing in what looked like a hospital room, but I could see things that were normally invisible, spiritual beings moving among the patients and staff. "Look carefully, Sarah," Jesus said. "Tell me what you see." At first, I saw what I expected: doctors, nurses, patients, family members, but then I began to notice the others. Dark, shadowy figures moving from room to room, whispering to patients who were near death. These beings were particularly focused on the elderly patients, those over 50 who were facing their final days. "Lord, what are those things?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Demons," Jesus replied solemnly. "They've been assigned a specific mission in these last days. Their job is to attack the faith of believers right when they're most vulnerable, in their final moments of life." I watched in horror as these dark beings whispered lies to dying patients. I saw them telling a 73-year-old woman who had been a faithful church member for 60 years that God had abandoned her, that her suffering proved he didn't love her. I saw them convincing an 82-year-old man who had served as a deacon that his lifetime of service meant nothing, that he was going to hell anyway. "This is why you've been seeing so many believers lose their faith in their final days," Jesus explained. "It's not natural doubt or psychological breakdown. It's a coordinated spiritual attack designed to steal souls at the last possible moment." The scope of what I was seeing was staggering. In every nursing home, every hospital, every hospice facility, these demonic forces were working around the clock. They were particularly targeting those over 50 because, as Jesus explained, older believers often had deeper, more established faith that Satan wanted to destroy. "But why are you allowing this?" I asked. Jesus looked at me with profound sadness. "Sarah, I don't allow it. I limit it. These attacks have always happened, but they're intensifying now because we're approaching the end times. Satan knows his time is short, so he's throwing everything he has at my people." He showed me something that made my medical training suddenly make sense in a completely new way. "This is why I placed you in geriatric medicine, Sarah. You've been fighting this battle without realizing it. Every time you held a patient's hand and spoke words of comfort, every time you advocated for pain relief so someone could die peacefully, every time you encouraged families to pray with their loved ones, you were pushing back against these demonic attacks." But then Jesus showed me something that gave me hope. I saw what happened when family members prayed with dying patients, when chaplains visited, when believers stood firm in their faith despite the whispered lies. The demons would literally flee, unable to withstand the presence of genuine prayer and faith. "This is the first event I need you to warn people about," Jesus said. "Tell them that their elderly loved ones are under spiritual attack. Tell them to pray more, visit more, speak truth, and love more. Tell them to be prepared for sudden changes in dying relatives. Believers who suddenly reject faith aren't necessarily showing their true hearts, but may be under demonic influence." The vision shifted, and suddenly we were looking at the entire world from above, like a satellite view of Earth. But instead of just seeing geography, I could see patterns of illness and disease spreading across continents. "The second event is coming very soon," Jesus said. "A new virus will emerge. It will spread faster than any pandemic in human history." I watched as the disease appeared simultaneously in multiple locations: major airports, shipping ports, urban centers. Within days, it was spreading exponentially across every continent. "This virus will be different," Jesus explained. "It will particularly affect the respiratory system, but it will also cause neurological symptoms that make people extremely paranoid and aggressive. Infected people won't just be sick. They'll become desperate, violent, unpredictable. This new virus was devastating to everyone it infected. I saw hospitals overflowing within weeks, not months. I saw supply chains collapsing even faster than they had in 2020. But this time, the breakdown was total. Grocery stores will be emptied within days of the first cases appearing in each city, Jesus said. But this time, it won't just be toilet paper and hand sanitizer. People will panic buy everything. Food, water, medicines, ammunition. The combination of the virus and the social breakdown will create chaos. I watched as normally peaceful communities turned into war zones. People weren't just hoarding supplies. They were fighting violently for them. The virus seemed to strip away civilized behavior, making infected people animalistic in their desperation. When will this start? I asked. Late October 2025, Jesus replied. Just 7 weeks from when you return to your body. The first cases will appear in New York, Los Angeles, and Miami simultaneously on October 25th. Within 2 weeks, it will be in every major city in America. Within a month, it will be global. But Lord, surely the medical community has learned from COVID. Surely we can respond better this time. Jesus shook his head sadly. The medical system is already strained beyond capacity. Hospitals are understaffed. Supply chains are fragile, and people's trust in institutions has been severely damaged. This virus will overwhelm everything within weeks, not months. He showed me specific scenes that made my medical training scream in protest. Emergency rooms with patients stacked in hallways, not enough ventilators, not enough beds, not enough staff. But worse than the medical crisis was the social breakdown. People will be afraid to leave their homes, but they'll also be afraid to stay, Jesus explained. The virus spreads easily indoors, but going out means risking contact with infected people who have become violent and unpredictable. I saw families barricading themselves in their homes, armed neighbors patrolling streets, grocery stores that looked like battlefields as desperate people fought over the last supplies. The combination of pandemic and social collapse created a feedback loop that made everything worse. How long will this last? I asked. The worst phase will be 4 months, Jesus replied, from late October 2025 through February 2026. By then, either people will have developed immunity or they won't have survived. But even in this dark vision, I saw points of light. Churches that had prepared, communities of believers who had stored supplies not just for themselves, but to share with others. I saw Christians who refused to give in to fear and paranoia, who continued to help their neighbors even at risk to themselves. My people who trust in me will find ways to serve even in the darkest times, Jesus said, but they must prepare now while there's still time. The pandemic vision faded, and Jesus showed me the third and most devastating event. The final test will come in August 2026. He said, a hurricane unlike anything in recorded history will form in the Atlantic. But Sarah, this won't be just a weather event. This will be my final test of faith for this generation. I watched as a massive storm system formed far out in the Atlantic Ocean. But this hurricane was different from anything I'd seen in weather reports. It was enormous, larger than entire states, and it was moving with a purpose that seemed almost intelligent. Hurricane Gabriel, Jesus said, naming the storm. It will make landfall on August 15th, 2026. And instead of weakening as it moves inland, it will grow stronger. It will cover the entire eastern United States from Maine to Florida, from the Atlantic coast to the Mississippi River. The devastation I witnessed was beyond imagination. Winds over 200 mph that lasted for days, not hours. Storm surge that reached hundreds of miles inland. Rain that fell continuously for a week, turning entire regions into inland seas. The death toll will be in the millions, Jesus said solemnly. Entire cities will be wiped off the map. The infrastructure damage will take decades to repair. It will look like the wrath of God poured out on America. But that's not what it really is, he continued, and his voice became more intense. This hurricane is actually my final selection process. I'm separating those who truly trust in me from those who only claim to believe. I watched more closely and began to see the pattern. In some areas, the hurricane was absolutely devastating. In others, just miles away, there was minimal damage. The difference wasn't geographic or meteorological, it was spiritual. Those who have genuine faith, who trust in me completely, even in the face of impossible circumstances, will be protected, Jesus explained. Not necessarily from all harm, but their lives will be preserved. Those who panic, who curse me, who abandon their faith when tested, they will not survive this storm. I saw believers who stayed calm even as 200 millimeter winds roared around their homes, who continued praying even as floodwaters rose, who helped rescue neighbors even in the midst of the worst storm in history. Miraculously, these people survived when survival should have been impossible. But I also saw people who had claimed to be Christians for years abandoning their faith the moment real testing came. They died not primarily from the storm, but from their own panic, their own poor decisions made in fear rather than faith. This is why I call it Hurricane Gabriel, Jesus said. Gabriel is my messenger, my announcer. This storm will announce to the world who my true people are. It will separate the wheat from the chaff in a way that nothing else could. But then, Jesus showed me something that took my breath away. In the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Gabriel, I saw the most incredible spiritual event in human history beginning to unfold. 1. Those who survived the hurricane, who maintained their faith through the ultimate test, will be ready for what comes next, Jesus said, and his face began to glow with joy. The rapture, Sarah, the taking up of my faithful church. It will happen within 12 months of your return to your body. I watched as believers across America, those who had endured the demonic attacks on their deathbeds, who had served others during the pandemic, who had maintained faith through Hurricane Gabriel, suddenly began rising into the air. September 8th, 2026, Jesus said, exactly 1 year from today, exactly 1 year from when you return with this message, that's when I will call my faithful church home. The scene was indescribable. Millions of people simultaneously lifting off the ground, their bodies transforming as they rose, meeting Jesus in the air. But I noticed something crucial. It wasn't every person who claimed to be Christian. It was only those who had proven their faith through the 3 tests. Many are called, but few are chosen. Jesus quoted, these 3 events, the demonic attacks, the pandemic, the hurricane, they're not punishments, Sarah. They're selection processes. I'm identifying those who truly belong to me, who will be ready for eternity. I felt overwhelmed by the scope of what I was seeing. Lord, how can I convince people? How can I prepare them for all of this? Jesus looked at me with infinite compassion. Sarah, you're not responsible for saving everyone. You're only responsible for delivering the message faithfully. Some will listen and prepare spiritually. Others will dismiss you, but I'll make sure the message reaches those who are meant to hear it. He began giving me specific instructions, practical guidance for the 3 events. For the demonic attacks on dying believers, tell people to surround their elderly loved ones with prayer and faith. Don't be surprised if lifelong believers suddenly doubt. That's demonic influence, not their true heart. Counter the lies with truth, the darkness with light, the fear with love. For the pandemic, tell them to prepare immediately. Store food, water, medicines, not just for themselves, but to share with others. But more importantly, prepare spiritually. This virus will test not just physical immunity, but spiritual immunity. Those who trust in me will find ways to serve others even in the darkest times. For Hurricane Gabriel, tell them this is the ultimate faith test. When the storm comes, don't panic, don't flee, don't curse me. Stand firm. Trust that I am in control even when everything looks impossible. Those who maintain faith through the storm will be ready for the rapture. Jesus paused and looked directly into my eyes. But Sarah, the most important message is this. Time is almost up. From the moment you return to your body, my people have exactly 1 year to get ready. 1 year to deepen their faith, to serve others, to prove they're truly mine. The three events will happen in rapid succession. The demonic attacks are already intensifying. You'll notice it immediately when you return to work. The pandemic starts in 7 weeks. Hurricane Gabriel hits in 11 months. And the rapture happens in exactly 12 months. I felt a pulling sensation, the same thing I'd observed in my patients who had near-death experiences. Lord, I don't want to leave. It's so perfect here. Jesus smiled with infinite love. My daughter, your mission isn't finished. The people who hear your story need to know the timeline, need to understand the spiritual reality behind what looks like natural disasters. You're going back as my messenger. The pulling grew stronger, but Jesus continued speaking. Remember, what looks like tragedy is actually mercy. I'm giving my people clear warnings and specific timelines. I'm testing their faith now, while there's still time for them to choose me completely. Tell them this. The demonic attacks, the pandemic, the hurricane, these are labor pains before birth, the birth of eternity, the birth of the new heaven and new earth. Those who endure to the end will be saved. The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air in a hospital bed, machines beeping frantically around me. My cardiologist, Dr. Peterson, was staring at my monitors in amazement. Dr. Montgomery, he said, shaking his head, you were clinically dead for 23 minutes. We shocked your heart 8 times. We were about to call time of death when you suddenly came back. Your EKG shows you had massive damage to your left ventricle, but somehow your heart is functioning normally now. I've never seen anything like this. But I wasn't the same person who had collapsed on her kitchen floor a week ago. In my body, yes, though I felt stronger and healthier than I had in years. But in my soul, I was completely transformed because I had seen the immediate future and had been given a mission that would consume my remaining time on earth. For the first few days, I could barely talk about what had happened without breaking down. Every time I tried to describe meeting Jesus, the visions of the 3 events, I would start sobbing, not from fear, but from the overwhelming memory of his love and the urgency of the message I'd been given. But I began to notice immediate changes in my work environment that confirmed everything I'd seen. The demonic attacks on elderly patients were becoming more obvious, more frequent. Believers who had been at peace were suddenly filled with doubt and despair in their final days. The pattern was exactly what Jesus had shown me. I started sharing my story carefully at first, with close colleagues who knew me well, with the chaplains at our hospital, with family members of patients who were struggling spiritually in their final days. The response was mixed. Some believed immediately, others thought the heart attack had affected my brain. But something remarkable began happening. When I prayed with dying patients who were under spiritual attack, when I spoke truth and love instead of just medical facts, the demonic influence would break. I watched lifelong believers rediscover their faith in their final moments, die peacefully instead of in spiritual agony. Word spread quickly through the Christian community. Within days, I was speaking at churches, medical conferences, anywhere people would listen. Some dismissed me as a doctor who had suffered brain damage from cardiac arrest. Others recognized the truth in what I was saying and began preparing immediately. As I write this story, we have exactly 47 days until the pandemic starts. We have 341 days until Hurricane Gabriel. We have 365 days until the rapture. If you're reading this story, especially if you're over 50, you need to understand that these aren't random disasters. They're the final tests before Jesus calls his church home. They're opportunities to prove your faith is real, not just intellectual belief. For the demonic attacks that are already intensifying, if you have elderly loved ones who are dying, surround them with prayer and faith. Don't be shocked if lifelong believers suddenly doubt. Counter the lies with truth. Spend time with them. Pray with them. Speak God's love over them. For the pandemic coming in October, start preparing now. Store food and water, but more importantly, prepare spiritually. This virus will create chaos and fear unlike anything we've seen. Those who trust in God will find ways to serve others even when everyone else is panicking. For Hurricane Gabriel next August, This is the ultimate faith test. When the most powerful storm in history covers half of America, don't panic. Trust that God is in control, even when survival looks impossible. Those who maintain faith through the storm will be ready for the rapture. But remember, this isn't ultimately about surviving disasters. It's about proving you're ready for eternity. Jesus is coming back for a church without spot or wrinkle, believers who have been tested and found faithful. You have less than 1 year to get ready. Not ready with supplies or preparations, but ready spiritually. Ready to trust God completely, no matter what happens. Ready to serve others even when you're afraid. Ready to maintain faith even when everything looks hopeless. The choice is yours. You can dismiss this as the hallucinations of a doctor who suffered cardiac arrest. You can explain away the medical impossibilities of my recovery. You can ignore the specific timeline and clear warnings. Or you can consider the possibility that the God who loves you is giving you final notice. That he's testing hearts now to see who truly belongs to him. That he's preparing to take his faithful church home. But first he needs to separate the genuine believers from those who only claim to believe. My name is Dr. Sarah Elizabeth Montgomery. 1 week ago, I died for 23 minutes and met Jesus Christ face to face. He sent me back with a warning and a timeline. The final test for the church begin in 47 days and end in exactly 1 year with the rapture. Between now and then, millions will face demonic attacks on their faith, a devastating pandemic, and the most powerful hurricane in history. But those who endure, who maintain faith through every test, will be ready when Jesus calls his church home. Time is almost up. What will you choose? Thank you for staying with us until the end. If you're still here, it means this message has touched your heart. Write your city or country in the comments so we can pray for your land, subscribe, and activate the bell to receive our daily revelations. And share this video with 3 people you love. 1 share can save a soul. We've also prepared a free ebook to bring you closer to heaven and protect you in these dark times. Don't wait. Claim it now. This could be your first step into God's eternal light.